The palace was quiet, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. Golden sunlight spilled across marble floors, glinting on polished swords and glimmering chandeliers. Yet shadows clung stubbornly to every carved corner. Inside the royal chambers, Princess Charlotte trembled, her small hands gripping the edge of a mahogany desk as if it could anchor her to reality. The guard before her, trained to be unwavering, stood rigid. But his hands shook, a subtle betrayal of centuries of discipline. Every heartbeat seemed amplified, echoing in the gilded walls like a drum of warning. Whispers floated behind carved arches, courtiers' voices soft yet sharp, reminding him of rules older than memory. Obedience, protocol, duty. Yet here, in the suspended moment, humanity demanded more than training could teach. The guard's eyes met Charlotte's, wide, terrified, trusting, and for the first time, the weight of centuries pressed on a single man, bending him almost to the breaking point. Somewhere in the shadows, a hidden observer watched, noting the tremor, recording the hesitation. A single misstep could unravel the palace's most sacred order, exposing secrets that had remained buried for generations. And in that charged stillness, one question loomed. Would duty triumph or would conscience? The palace was alive with a tension that no visitor could see, but everyone inside felt. Golden light spilled to the tall windows, glinting on polished marble floors, but shadows clung to corners where whispers lingered. Princess Charlotte's small hands clutched the edge of the mahogany desk, knuckles white, eyes wide with fear. The guard before her, trained to withstand storms and threats alike, faltered. His hands trembled beneath the ceremonial gloves. Every fiber was being caught between instinct and the rigid weight of duty. It was Camilla who had orchestrated this moment. Quietly, deliberately, she had maneuvered the events that brought terror to Charlotte's doorstep, a smile hidden beneath layers of civility. Her influence rippled unseen through corridors and whispered orders, each perfectly calculated to test the limits of loyalty. And now, the consequences of her manipulation were unfolding in real time. The guard's eyes flickered to the princess, to the raw humanity in her gaze, and for the first time, he felt the impossibility of his duty pressing down like the palace itself. The echo of distant footsteps reverberated along the marble halls, signaling the approach of scrutiny. Courtiers lingered just out of reach, their soft whispers tracing the rigid contours of centuries-old protocol. Stay calm. Remember your training. Remember the rules, one murmured, but the words did little to steady the guard's faltering composure. He wanted to act, to shield the princess, yet the centuries of ceremonial expectation wove chains tighter than any sword. Charlotte's voice broke the silence, a trembling plea that carried more weight than protocol ever could. Please, you have to stop this. Her words were a lifeline, fragile and insistent. The guard's chest tightened as he realized the enormity of the choice before him. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and the palace's legacy, its centuries of unbroken order, could unravel. Camilla watched from the shadows, her presence invisible yet undeniable. She had anticipated this tension, had designed it so meticulously that even the most disciplined guard could falter. Every heartbeat, every breath, every quiver in Charlotte's voice served her plan. And yet, as the guard's gaze met Charlotte's, the human instinct to protect wrestled violently with the duty carved into him by generations of tradition. The guard's hands trembled near the ceremonial sword, a symbol of authority and responsibility. Time stretched. Each second amplified the moral conflict raging inside him. Could he follow the chain of command and uphold the palace's rigid protocol? Or could he surrender to instinct, risking disgrace but saving the girl before him? Behind him, Camilla's shadow lingered, silent, calculating, watching for the moment the scales would tip. The camera drifts along the polished marble, catching sunlight on tapestries depicting monarchs standing steadfast in crises of their own making. In those woven histories, the guard glimpsed both inspiration and unbearable expectation. To act incorrectly was to stain not only his name, but the names of those who had served faithfully for centuries. The pressure was nearly suffocating. Charlotte's trembling intensified. "I'm begging you, don't let her do this." Her voice was desperate, each word a plea not just for safety, but for someone to defy the invisible chains that threatened to control her life. The guard's pulse raced, a relentless drum in his ears. He inhaled, trying to summon the discipline drilled into him since his earliest days as a palace protector. Yet instinct, raw and human, surged through him, demanding action. Camilla's influence was not subtle. Every element of the palace, every whisper of protocol, every motion in the room had been orchestrated to test the guard, to force him to crack. He knew it now. The courtiers' murmurs, the echo of boots down the halls, even the sunlight streaming across the marble. They were all part of her design. And yet, Charlotte's eyes, wide and pleading, anchored him in a truth older than protocol. The duty to protect life, even above centuries of ceremonial expectation. He stepped forward, each movement deliberate, measured. The sword remained sheathed, a restraint born of reason and conscience. The guard's mind raced through every rule, every hierarchy, every reprimand he might face. But Charlotte's trembling form before him, a fragile testament to trust and innocence, weighed heavier than any disciplinary manual. And somewhere in a shadowed corridor, Camilla watched. A smile played briefly across her lips. Not cruel, but confident in the inevitability of the tension she created. She had watched every hesitation, every subtle tremor, every flicker of doubt in the guard's eyes. Yet, she did not see the human choice being forged in real time, a defiance born not of protocol, but of conscience. The palace seemed to hold its breath. Sunlight glinted off ornate chandeliers, casting delicate reflections across the room. Yet the atmosphere was charged, electric with anticipation. Every detail, every carved cornice, every polished surface seemed to pulse with history, watching as a guard faced the impossible. To obey centuries of command, or to save a life above all else. The tremor subsided in his hands. He moved with controlled resolve, balancing duty and instinct, protecting the princess without defying the ceremonial bounds entirely. Charlotte's breathing eased just slightly, though the tension in her eyes remained. And in a hidden alcove, a shadowed observer recorded everything. The subtle quiver of hands, the hesitation, the delicate moral reckoning unfolding before the palace walls. Time seemed to slow. The marble floors, the gilded tapestries, the echoing halls, all bore witness to this pivotal moment. The guard's face was a mask of focus, his every motion a delicate dance between centuries of protocol and the instinct to protect. And yet, even as order seemed to hold, the palace itself seemed alive with awareness, noting the tremor, the human fracture that had appeared despite meticulous training. Camilla's orchestration had brought the palace to this edge. And now, though the immediate threat seemed contained, the unseen observer had seen too much. Secrets that had lain dormant for decades had been glimpsed, vulnerabilities exposed. The guard's choice had preserved Charlotte, for now. But the consequences of hesitation, of human vulnerability within the strict hierarchy, would ripple through the palace in ways no one yet understood. A hidden observer noticed the guards trembling, a subtle breach that went unseen by courtiers yet monumental in consequence. Camilla's design had succeeded in exposing a fracture, but the ripple was just beginning. Secrets long buried within the palace walls were ready to emerge, and loyalty itself would soon be tested beyond measure. The palace was quieter now, but its silence was deceptive. Behind the gilded doors and polished floors, whispers wound their way through hallways like unseen currents, carrying tales of hesitation, duty, and betrayal. The echo of the guard's trembling hand still lingered in memory, a subtle fracture in centuries of unbroken protocol. And in the shadows, Camilla's presence lingered as well, unseen but orchestrating every ripple of consequence. Investigators gathered in the council room, its walls lined with portraits of monarchs who had faced crises of loyalty and intrigue. Ancient ledgers lay open, ink faded but legible, recording past incidents eerily similar to today's near crisis. Each entry detailed a guard who had faltered, a chain of command strained, a decision forced upon the human conscience. The palace, in its grandeur, seemed almost alive, watching the deliberations, judging, recording. Senior officials reviewed the event in hushed tones. Every gesture, every hesitation, every glance Charlotte had cast at the guard was dissected and catalogued. The questions were unspoken yet omnipresent. Why had he paused? Was it fear or something more? One investigator, eyes sharp behind thin spectacles, traced a finger along the protocol manual, its leather cover worn and pages brittle. Every act, every hesitation, is a measure of loyalty, he murmured. And loyalty is everything. Documents were spread across the table. Ceremonial codes, centuries-old decrees, and letters recounting past breaches of duty. The chain of command, obligations to protect the royal family, and ceremonial protocols were examined in painstaking detail. Each guideline, etched in formality, emphasized that hesitation was not merely a human flaw. It was a challenge to the institution itself. Yet the hesitation had been subtle, almost imperceptible, and that made it more troubling. The investigators paused over a ledger from nearly 200 years prior, recording a guard whose moment of hesitation had nearly endangered a young prince. The parallels were uncanny. Fear tempered by conscience, a life teetering on the brink, the whisper of someone else manipulating circumstances from the shadows. Camilla's signature influence, while invisible, was beginning to emerge in retrospect. A string pulled here, a quiet nudge there, every detail designed to test obedience. The palace's architecture seemed to emphasize the weight of tradition. Marble corridors stretched endlessly. Gilded arches held centuries of ceremonial authority, and tapestries depicted monarchs who had commanded without hesitation. Each artifact reinforced the expectation. The human element must bend to duty. Yet, in this investigation, the human element had pushed back, subtly, imperceptibly, and that anomaly was impossible to ignore. Evidence was not only textual. Witness accounts described subtle gestures, micro-expressions that betrayed internal struggle. Charlotte's pleading eyes, the guard's trembling hands, the faintest hesitation in his step. Each became a thread woven into a complex tapestry of inquiry. One official whispered, "This is more than protocol. There is something personal here." The words hung in the air, acknowledging the possibility that loyalty could be tested not only by duty, but by hidden motives. The camera moved along the shelves of artifacts, ancient ceremonial swords, decrees framed in gilded wood, letters sealed with wax, each object a silent witness to centuries of human decisions measured against the backdrop of duty. Even as investigators examined the text, they began to see patterns, subtle anomalies pointing toward intentional interference. Someone had orchestrated events to provoke hesitation, to expose weakness, and the fingerprints of manipulation were faint but present. One ledger noted an incident in which a guard had been manipulated by a court insider, forcing him into indecision at a critical moment. The details were chilling, a plan concealed within layers of official protocol, a subtle pressure applied so that the guard's morality clashed with his duty. Camilla's methods echoed these historical precedents. Her orchestration was almost surgical, a web of influence that preyed upon both conscience and obligation. The palace itself seemed complicit in the investigation. Every echo of footsteps, every creak of polished floorboards, every whisper of wind through open windows reminded officials that the environment amplified human frailty. They realized the tremor in the guard's hand was not an isolated incident. It was symptomatic of something deeper, something that could ripple across the institution if left unchecked. Investigators paused over ceremonial records, noting a minor violation. A lock left open in a rarely used corridor, a document out of place. It was insignificant in isolation, yet within the web of protocol, even the smallest anomaly could have monumental consequences. Camilla's subtle orchestration became more evident with each discovery. Every detail pointed to deliberate interference, a test designed not to harm directly, but to destabilize trust and manipulate conscience. Discussions were measured, deliberate, filled with moral weight. One official leaned back, voice low. "We must ask ourselves, was a hesitation fear, or was it conscience recognizing deception?" The room fell silent, each person aware that the answer had implications far beyond this single incident. If a guard could be manipulated by someone within the palace, the integrity of centuries-old loyalty was at risk. Historical records revealed a pattern of internal interference, a shadow beneath the ceremonial facade. Each document and artifact told a story of discipline tested, moral courage weighed, and human vulnerability exposed. Camilla's presence, though unseen, fits seamlessly into this narrative, a modern echo of ancient manipulations, precise, calculated, and morally disorienting. Charlotte's vulnerability became central to the investigation. Her pleading gaze, the raw humanity displayed, serve as both the catalyst and the measure of the guard's response. Officials debated, cross-referenced, and traced the event back to the chain of command. The minor violation of protocol, the unlocked corridor, the misfiled order, suddenly became a lens through which they could see Camilla's influence. A subtle, deliberate breach that forced human error to the surface. The palace walls seemed to hold their breath as the investigators pieced together the sequence. Every whispered instruction, every subtle coercion, every hesitation became a narrative of moral tension. Camilla's manipulation was now undeniable. A series of nudges designed to exploit human weakness, to test whether centuries of loyalty could withstand invisible pressure. And yet, despite the evidence, the guard's hesitation was not condemned outright. His moral conflict, his instinct to protect Charlotte, weighed heavily in deliberations. The palace recognized that the human element could not be erased, even amidst centuries of strict protocol. His actions became a mirror for the institution itself. Disciplined yet fallible, loyal yet capable of conscience overriding order. Hours later, the truth began to unfold. Minor ceremonial errors were traced, subtle historical parallels noted, and the presence of deliberate interference became undeniable. Camilla's fingerprints, though invisible to all but the most attentive, were now emerging in the pattern of hesitation, in the micro details of protocol violations, in the exploitation of human instinct. The palace, grand and imposing, seemed almost sentient, noting the cracks in its veneer of control. The guard's internal struggle, once invisible, now became the focal point of reflection. Investigators recognized that duty alone could not account for hesitation. There was a moral imperative at play. Charlotte's fear, Camilla's orchestration, and the guard's humanity intersected in a way that illuminated the fragility of absolute obedience. History, protocol, and human instinct converge in a delicate, morally charged equilibrium. The camera moves along the corridors, capturing the polished floors, tapestries, and arches, all silent witnesses to centuries of discipline and recent upheaval. The palace seemed alive with anticipation, noting every decision, every hesitation, every moral choice. And somewhere in the shadows, Camilla watched, confident in her manipulation, yet unaware that her orchestration had revealed more than just the guard's vulnerability. It had exposed the palace itself to scrutiny. Every investigator's note, every ledger entry, every whispered observation became part of a tapestry of revelation. Minor violations, subtle gestures, and overlooked instructions combined into an intricate map of manipulation. Camilla's influence was now undeniable, and the consequences of her orchestration loomed large. Loyalty tested, moral courage examined, and the palace's centuries-old discipline confronted by human fallibility. The palace corridors seemed smaller now, as if the very walls leaned in to witness what was unfolding. Whispers of protocol and history vibrated through every archway, every gilded surface, but they were drowned out by the intensity of the confrontation to come. The guard, still shaking from the previous day's ordeal, was summoned to the council chamber, a room heavy with centuries of authority, the weight of expectation pressing down with tangible force. Camilla entered first, poised, composed, yet her presence was electric with intent. Every step was measured, every glance deliberate. She had orchestrated the events leading to this moment, manipulating whispers, subtle gestures, and the very architecture of the palace to push a single man to the edge. Now, as she leaned slightly against the polished mahogany, her eyes held a quiet certainty. The guard would answer not only to protocol, but to her subtle coercion. The guard stepped forward, his uniform crisp, his sword aside, yet his hands betrayed the tension coursing through him. He felt centuries of expectation bearing down on every joint, every muscle. Princess Charlotte's words echoed in his mind, the pleading gaze of innocence he had sworn to protect. And yet before him, the senior officials sat in stern observation, their eyes weighing him, measuring him, reminding him that inaction was as visible as action. Camilla's voice broke the silence first, calm, controlled, yet carrying a subtle edge that made impossible to ignore. "You hesitated," she said. The words were simple, but the accusation rang through the room like a bell. Every observer leaned in, anticipating his response, expecting either contrition or defiance. The guard's pulse quickened. He searched for the proper phrasing, the precise admission that would satisfy centuries of protocol while not betraying the instinct that had guided him to protect Charlotte. The room held its breath. Courtiers, senior officials, and investigators all waited for the inevitable clash of conscience against authority, of humanity against ceremony. The guard's eyes flickered towards Charlotte, then to Camilla. The juxtaposition was stark. Charlotte's fear and trust, Camilla's manipulation and calculation. One represented instinct and moral courage, the other the subtle, corrosive power of unseen orchestration. An official cleared his throat, voice formal, deliberate. Explain your hesitation. Every moment of indecision could have endangered the princess. You must account for it. The guard swallowed, feeling the enormity of the expectation. His answer could determine not only his fate, but the palace's perception of loyalty, the fragile trust that underpins centuries of service. He spoke, voice steadying despite the tension. I followed my duty, but I could not ignore the immediate risk to the princess. My training guided me, but instinct demanded protection. The room reacted subtly, an intake of breath, a murmur, but Camilla's eyes remained unreadable, her composure intact. She had anticipated this response, had prepared for the justification that human instinct would inevitably demand. Instinct, Camilla repeated, her tone slicing to the air like a blade. Do you believe instinct trumps protocol? That centuries of discipline can be disregarded for emotion? The question was rhetorical, but it hung in the chamber with lethal precision. The guard's conscience wrestled with the answer. Centuries of loyalty clashed violently with the moral imperative he had felt in that moment of hesitation. Princess Charlotte's presence in the room was quiet, but magnetic. Her eyes met the guard's, silently affirming his choice to act with conscience, even as protocol weighed heavily upon him. The memory of her fear, her trust, her humanity. It became a moral anchor. The guard's voice, though measured, carried the weight of centuries of ethical struggle. Protocol exists to guide us, he said, but it is not meant to blind us to immediate danger. To act without conscience would be the true failure of duty. A murmur spread through the chamber. Some officials stiffened at the acknowledgement of human judgment over rigid ceremony. Camilla's lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly, an acknowledgement that her manipulation had forced the moral dilemma she desired. Yet the guard's response also revealed a resilience she had not anticipated, a blend of loyalty and conscience, disciplined yet human. The confrontation escalated further when another official presented subtle evidence of the manipulation. A lock left open, a misfiled order. These minor violations correlate with the events preceding the hesitation. Someone within the palace interfered. The room shifted. Every eye now considered the invisible hand at work. Camilla's composure remained, but her calculated control was no longer absolute. Her orchestration was being traced, revealed, dissected under centuries of scrutiny. The guard, still under observation, realized the confrontation was no longer solely about him. Charlotte's safety, the integrity of protocol, and the palace's reputation were all entwined with his actions. Each breath, each pause, each measured word became a testament to human resilience in the face of orchestrated manipulation. He understood that his decision, once private, was now a precedent, a test not only of loyalty but of moral courage within the gilded walls. Camilla's manipulation, subtle yet deliberate, began to unravel as investigators traced patterns. Whispers, gestures, minor procedural deviations, all aligning with her orchestration. The room held a tense awareness. A single woman's influence had shaken centuries of unbroken protocol, forcing a confrontation between human conscience and ceremonial duty. The guard's eyes met Camilla's directly. No words passed, yet the weight of unspoken truth filled the space. Charlotte's memory hovered, reminding him why it acted, why instinct and conscience had taken precedence over rigid formality. The room became a crucible, testing the balance between moral judgment and hierarchical obedience. Voices rose, questions flared, and accusations were exchanged. The guard stood firm, resolute, unwavering in his explanation. The emotional tension was palpable. Each moment stretched, charged with centuries of tradition and the raw immediacy of human vulnerability. Camilla's plan had forced exposure, but had also revealed an unexpected strength. Loyalty tempered by conscience, discipline guided by humanity. Minutes passed like hours. Every official present weighed the implications. A guard had acted with moral discernment in defiance of subtle manipulation. A young princess had been saved, yet the palace hierarchy had been tested, exposed to cracks even Camilla had not foreseen. The confrontation became a study in power, influence, and human morality within an institution built to enforce obedience above all else. The room quieted. Camilla's eyes lingered on the guard, calculating yet now tinged with respect, acknowledgement of the unexpected outcome. The subtle orchestration had succeeded in creating tension, but had failed to override conscience. The guard's humanity had triumphed, though not without cost. His hesitation would be noted, debated, and remembered in palace records. Charlotte, safe yet shaken, remained a silent witness to the moral complexity that had played out on the council chamber floor. And in a hidden alcove, the minor violations, the unlocked doors, the misfiled orders, were catalogued by another observer. The threads of manipulation and exposure were now intertwined, setting the stage for further investigation, further confrontation, and the slow unraveling of secrets Camilla had long hoped to conceal. The palace, magnificent and imposing, absorbed every detail, every moral choice, and every faltering heartbeat, storing them in the fabric of history as both warning and testament. The palace, grand and imposing, had quieted after the confrontation, but the silence was brittle, as if holding its breath against the weight of secrets. Marble corridors gleamed under dimmed lights, but shadows clung to every corner, stretching long across gilded tapestries. In the council chambers, senior officials and investigators worked in subdued tension, rifling through letters, logs, and decrees, each document revealing fragments of intentions long hidden. Camilla's influence was no longer theoretical. It was evident in every misfiled order, every subtle breach of protocol. Yet, for all her careful orchestration, these discoveries hinted at even deeper motives. She had engineered Charlotte's peril, but the documents now surfacing suggested she sought far more than a mere test of loyalty. Every page whispered of manipulation, of unseen levers pulled to sway decisions, and of consequences that could echo far beyond the palace walls. The guard retreated inward, his mind heavy with guilt and shame. The memory of Charlotte's trembling eyes haunted him, and the knowledge that Camilla had exploited his conscience gnawed at his pride. He sat alone in a shadowed corridor, reviewing the events over and over in his mind. Each hesitation, each choice, each subtle cue that had pushed him to the brink. Yet he also recognized that in that very crucible, he had acted with integrity, protecting life without abandoning duty. Investigators uncovered letters sealed with wax, stamped with symbols of authority, each detailing instructions for subtle manipulations of palace routine. A misdirected order here, a minor procedural anomaly there, each perfectly designed to create hesitation, to test the moral mettle of those bound by centuries of protocol. As they pieced together the web, a portrait of Camilla's strategy emerged. She had anticipated every reaction, every potential lapse, and yet the human element had defied her precision. Confidential logs revealed past incidents eerily similar to today's near crisis, as if the palace itself had been a stage for repeated moral tests across decades. Courtiers whispered to previous guards who had faltered, of hidden correspondences that never reached the light, of minor infractions quietly documented but never punished. The palace's grandeur had always masked fragility. Now that fragility was on display, illuminated by Camilla's orchestration. The guard wandered through hallways, his reflection stretching across polished floors, seeing not just himself but the centuries of human vulnerability preserved in every arch and tapestry. He understood that his hesitation had been both a failure and a triumph. A failure in the eyes of strict protocol, a triumph in the realm of conscience. Every choice, every hesitation, became a moral ledger that weighed heavier than ceremonial tradition. As senior officials sifted through the evidence, the palace itself seemed alive with awareness. Doors that had been left unlocked, orders misfiled, instructions subtly altered. Each anomaly pointed to deliberate interference. Camilla's orchestration was methodical, almost surgical, and yet each revelation exposed her influence while also highlighting the human capacity for moral judgment. The palace, in its silent vigilance, recorded each fracture, each hesitation, and each subtle triumph of conscience over control. In a quiet chamber, the guard reviewed intercepted letters, reading Camilla's instructions to subordinates who had subtly executed her plan. The elegance of her manipulation was undeniable. Yet beneath it lay ambition, a desire to test and expose the palace hierarchy itself. The guard felt a mixture of fear, anger, and determination. Camilla had exploited vulnerability, but she had also revealed the very strength of those who remained loyal yet human. Investigators found confidential logs detailing forgotten decrees, minor procedural violations, and clandestine correspondences. Each item painted a picture of shadowed intent, illustrating how easily protocol could be bent, and how delicately loyalty balanced on the edge of obedience and conscience. Camilla's fingerprints, invisible yet undeniable, traced through these records, exposing the depth of her manipulation while hinting at her next moves. The palace corridors, once serene, now seemed charged with tension. Every marble surface, every gilded frame, every echo of footsteps became a silent witness to moral reckoning. The guard understood that Camilla had set events into motion whose consequences might linger far longer than a single day's confrontation. Yet he also recognized that conscience had survived, that duty and humanity could coexist even in the most extreme pressure. Hours passed as investigators reconstructed timelines, cross-referencing letters, logs, and ceremonial codes. The smallest details revealed patterns of deliberate disruption. Camilla had created a labyrinth, each turn designed to test loyalty and expose hesitation. And yet, as they mapped her influence, the palace's defenders began to understand the human factor, the unpredictable, moral, instinctive force that even Camilla could not fully control. The guard returned to Charlotte's chambers briefly, observing the princess as she regained composure. The ordeal had left her shaken, yet her trust remained. He realized that protection was not merely about enforcing protocol. It was about navigating moral ambiguity, about recognizing threats that came not from outside the palace walls, but from within. Camilla's orchestration had revealed this truth in its most extreme form. Investigators gathered in hushed discussion, weighing punishment against understanding, morality against procedure. Camilla's plan had exposed vulnerabilities, yet had also revealed resilience. The palace, in its centuries of discipline, had survived, but it had been tested to its core. Every whisper, every document, every hidden instruction became evidence of both betrayal and fortitude. The camera drifts through shadowed corridors, capturing the tapestries and artifacts that had witnessed centuries of human choice. In these silent halls, Camilla's influence lingered like a specter, reminding all present that manipulation could exploit the gaps between duty and conscience. And yet, within those same halls, the strength of integrity, courage, and moral judgment persisted, quietly asserting itself against orchestrated deception. The guard understood now that Camilla's threat was far from over. Her manipulations had been exposed, but the palace had not yet resolved the consequences of human vulnerability she had provoked. Each minor violation, each unlocked door, each misfiled order became a symbol of tension between obedience and morality. And somewhere in the shadows, Camilla prepared her next move, her ambition undiminished by exposure. The palace, magnificent and imposing, held both fragility and strength within its walls. Secrets long hidden were surfacing, and the human cost of unwavering protocol became evident. The guard, haunted by guilt yet strengthened by conscience, prepared for what lay ahead. Camilla's orchestration had revealed fractures, but it had also revealed the capacity for courage, loyalty, and moral resilience. A discovery of a forbidden document confirmed that the threat was not over. Camilla's influence ran deeper than anyone realized, and the palace's defenders now face a choice: confront the orchestrator of chaos, or risk further compromise. What awaited them behind closed doors would force loyalty, courage, and conscience to their ultimate test. The palace exhaled, though no one noticed. Marble corridors gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers, but the silence was not peaceful. It was cautious. Shadows lingered in corners, reminders of fragility exposed in recent days. Guards adjusted their uniforms, tassels brushing polished surfaces, each movement precise, deliberate, signaling a return to ceremony. Yet beneath the surface, every heartbeat carried a memory of disruption, the echo of hesitation and the presence of manipulation. The guard stood once more at his post, shoulders squared, gaze sharp. His hands no longer trembled, though the memory of Charlotte's fear and Camilla's orchestration lingered, etched into his consciousness. He had faced the ultimate moral test, the collision of instinct, duty, and protocol. Now, he reconciled his humanity with his obligation. Discipline and conscience were no longer opposing forces. They had found fragile equilibrium. Camilla's influence, while still present in whispers and shadows, was diminished. Investigators had traced her manipulations, documented minor breaches, and mapped her orchestration with precision. The palace hierarchy quietly ensured consequences were administered, not loudly, not theatrically, but firmly. Loyalists retained their posts. Those who had exploited protocols subtly were removed or disciplined, their ambition checked by the weight of centuries-old authority. Princess Charlotte moved through the halls with renewed composure. Her eyes, once wide with fear, now reflected measured confidence. She understood that the palace, while imposing and often rigid, had safeguards beyond protocol, human vigilance, moral courage, and the resilience of those sworn to protect her. The guard's steadfastness had restored her faith, bridging the gap between fear and trust. Ceremonial duties resumed with careful precision. Each guard step, each gesture, each salute followed the rhythm of centuries of training. Yet there was an awareness now, a quiet vigilance informed by experience. Every unlocked door, every misfiled order, every subtle manipulation was remembered, cataloged, and addressed. The palace learned, even as it maintained the illusion of unshakable order. The guard patrolled corridors, observing the subtle realignment of authority and trust. His presence was no longer a testament to obedience alone. It was a living example of conscience guided by duty. Every step, every glance, every measured action reinforced a lesson learned in the crucible of moral conflict. That loyalty without judgment was incomplete, and that courage often required discretion and restraint. Camilla, aware that her orchestration had been partially thwarted, remained a quiet force within the palace. Yet her influence could no longer overshadow the demonstrated resilience of those who acted with conscience. She had revealed fractures, but the palace's defenders had mended them with dignity and deliberation. Her presence was a reminder of the ever-present tension between manipulation and morality, between ambition and duty. Investigators reviewed logs and correspondence one final time, confirming the guard's adherence to both protocol and conscience. Every detail of the crisis was archived, every lesson codified, every minor procedural error corrected. The palace, as much a character as its inhabitants, had absorbed the lessons and reasserted control without fanfare, preserving tradition while acknowledging the human element. Charlotte and the guard met briefly in the inner chambers. No words were necessary. A shared glance conveyed trust regained, the bond protection reaffirmed. The ordeal had tested boundaries, exposed vulnerabilities, and challenged the very essence of loyalty, but it had also strengthened the relationships that maintained the palace's moral and ceremonial fabric. As the sun set behind towering spires, light glinting off marble and gold, the palace returned to its stately rhythm. Courtiers resumed their duties, guards their patrols, and the ceremonial order flowed with renewed precision. The human cost of recent events lingered, but was tempered by lessons learned and integrity reaffirmed. Discipline was not merely restored. It had evolved, informed by the crucible of moral decision and the quiet heroism of those who had acted with conscience. In private, the guard reflected on the events that had shaken him. Camilla's manipulations had tested not only his loyalty, but his understanding of duty itself. Yet he now knew that resilience was measured not solely by adherence to protocol, but by the courage to act morally within the framework of centuries of tradition. His vigilance was renewed, tempered by experience, and his resolve became a guide for younger guards learning the delicate balance of duty and humanity. The palace, magnificent and imposing, had weathered the storm. Order was restored, but the lessons lingered in the marble halls, in the eyes of those who had witnessed the moral reckoning, and in the quiet vigilance of those tasked with guarding both tradition and life. The echo of human judgment alongside ceremonial precision would resonate through generations, shaping the next wave of palace defenders. The palace had returned to its rhythm, yet silence now carried a weight beyond mere absence of sound. Marble corridors gleamed under the muted light of dawn, chandeliers casting soft reflections across polished floors. Each room, each hallway, held the memory of recent events, the tremor of hesitation, the shadow of manipulation, and the enduring strength of conscience. The palace itself seemed to breathe, aware of the choices made within its walls, recording them not in ink alone, but in the subtle cadence of vigilance and restraint. The guard moved quietly through the halls, his steps measured, precise, yet lighter than before. He no longer carried only the weight of protocol. He carried memory, moral clarity, and a knowledge that human judgment could coexist with centuries of duty. His experience had become a lesson, quietly guiding those who watched him, shaping the next generation of palace defenders with a blend of discipline and conscience. Every gesture, every posture, every glance now conveyed authority tempered with humanity. Princess Charlotte walked through the palace with calm assurance. Her gaze lingered briefly on the familiar corridors where fear had once gripped her heart. She understood that the palace, with all its grandeur, was more than stone and ceremony. It was a living institution, shaped by human courage as much as by protocol. The ordeal she had endured, orchestrated by Camilla and mediated by the guard's moral courage, became a silent testament to the delicate balance between obedience and conscience. Camilla, though still present in the palace's shadow corners, had lost the leverage of unseen manipulation. Her orchestration had been revealed, catalogued, and constrained by the vigilance and judgment of those she had sought to destabilize. Yet her presence remained a reminder. The palace is never without challenge, and the lessons of vigilance, moral courage, and ethical restraint are never final. Investigators and senior officials continued their work, quietly reviewing archives, ensuring that every document, every minor violation, and every subtle manipulation was noted. History was preserved not just in ink, but in the moral memory of those who had acted with conscience. Lessons of courage, restraint, and duty were encoded into the institution itself, subtle yet enduring. The guard paused before the throne room, observing the reflection of light across the polished floor. He thought of every heartbeat, every trembling hand, every moment of choice. The palace had tested him, had exposed him to fear, manipulation, and moral tension. And yet he had endured, guided by conscience, strengthened by duty, and affirmed in the value of human judgment. The echo of past hesitation had become a legacy, a silent testament to the balance between loyalty and morality. Charlotte approached, and in a quiet exchange, no words were necessary. Trust, restored and tempered by shared ordeal, passed between them silently. The palace, ever vigilant, seemed to acknowledge this unspoken bond, the intersection of protection, conscience, and duty. The lessons of fear, manipulation, and moral courage would ripple quietly through the corridors, shaping the ethos of those who served within its walls for decades to come. Camilla's influence, though diminished, remained a cautionary presence. Her subtle manipulations had revealed vulnerabilities, yet they had also highlighted the resilience and moral strength of the palace's defenders. Silence, in this context, was not absence. It was reflection, observation, and the quiet persistence of values that transcended fear, manipulation, and ambition. As night fell over the palace, torches flickering along marble walls, the guard remained vigilant. His watch was not merely ceremonial. It was moral, ethical, and profoundly human. Each shadow, each echo, each faint whisper reminded him that duty was a living responsibility, and that loyalty, when tempered by conscience, created a legacy far stronger than protocol alone. The palace, steeped in centuries of history, had survived the orchestration, the hesitation, and the human tests. Its legacy was not merely in the stone and gold, but in the enduring moral vigilance of those who served, who acted with conscience, and who balanced the weight of duty with the imperatives of humanity. The tremors of the past have been recorded, yet they had become guidance rather than condemnation. And in that quiet, reflective stillness, the palace seemed to whisper a question across time. How will those who serve next navigate the delicate line between obedience and conscience, between duty and moral courage? The lessons of the guard, of Princess Charlotte, and of Camilla's subtle orchestration had become part of its living memory, a legacy encoded in silence, vigilance, and quiet reflection.